So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm excited. This is our third speaker we've had for the Business, Faith, and Common Good Speaker Series this fall. And we're bringing to you one of our own from here at Creighton University. So that's exciting to me. I met Professor Greenspoon a few years ago. I actually watched him give a talk here at Harper Center probably 8 or 9 years ago, and I thought, that guy is very interesting and very funny, and I would like to have him come do some sort of talk over in the business school sometime, because some of the things he touched on then were about business from a Jewish perspective. So we finally got together, and I've got him coming here tonight, but I want to share with you a little bit about his background. He holds the Philip and Ethel Klutznick Chair in Jewish Civilization here at Creighton. He's also professor of theology and classical Near East studies. Before he was at Creighton, he's been here almost 25 years. He was at Clemson University for 20 years. So he's been around a while, and he's done a lot of writing. If you look at his CV, it's about 50 pages long. So it's pretty impressive. He's the kind of guy who last year at his professional society meeting, which is an international event, they had a special meeting just to have a panel discussion about his influence on the field. So that's the kind of influence that he has. But he's also written quite a few interesting books. One of his most recent books is The Bible in the News. So that's an interesting issue. He has a book on Jewish approach to humor. He has a book on Jews in athletics. So he kind of runs the full gamut, but he really has a specialty in doing a lot of background on Jewish civilization and on Jewish writings. He's the editor of the 32-volume Studies in Jewish Civilization series. And he was also named Researcher of the Year here at Creighton University in 2020. So he comes to us with a lot of background, a lot of knowledge, and he's an interesting person to listen to. So I think you'll appreciate his approach, helping us understand a Jewish approach to business and business behavior. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. So now you're going to find out whether I've gotten better in the last 9 years, worse, or pretty much the same. I'm actually chuckling at myself because Dr. Gustus and I were talking yesterday, and just like anybody else, my first question was, what should I wear? And he says, okay, you do not have to wear a suit, and that's fine. I said, great. I haven't worn a suit in years. I don't even know if I have a suit. So what do? I go into my closet this morning, and the only thing that fits is a suit. So, or maybe if something else fit, but this was probably the best part of it. So my experience in teaching business ethics is not very auspicious. Years ago, when I was teaching at Clemson, there was a philosophy religion department. Sometimes philosophers and religionists cohere, and sometimes they don't. But in this case, what happened was that the university decided for some reason that almost every student was going to have to study business ethics. And then anybody in the philosophy religion department would have to teach business ethics. Well, I'm the least likely person to have done it, or the least qualified, because I don't know anything about business. I mean, I know how to go to a store and buy, but I have no idea how to make money in business or monetize anything. And moreover, I really didn't have any knowledge of ethics in the sense that they were talking about, not religious ethics, but secular marketplace ethics. Nonetheless, I did teach the course for 2 years. I actually don't remember what year it was, probably 85, 86. Do you remember that? That was tough. You remember those years, 85, 86? Yeah, those were tough years. And the only thing I remember about the class is that the textbook, which was filled with case studies, was outrageously expensive, and the cases in it were really not very interesting because they were slam dunks. All right, you work as an engineer at a car company, and their brakes are faulty, but they don't really want to spend the money to fix it up, so we're going to have to figure something else to do. Would you join in that effort? Well, of course I wouldn't join in that effort. And the cases were like that. They didn't strike me as especially interesting. So to me, interesting examples of any sorts of ethics relate to when there are two good or positive aspects, but you can only go with one of them. Now, the examples I'm going to give you right now are, I would say, traditional Jewish examples. They're not related specifically to business, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but they are dated and slightly sexist. So I apologize for that, because this is the first example we learned, I can remember learning. You are married, or I am married. My wife comes out with a new outfit. She says to me, Lenny, that being my nickname, how do you think I look? I say to myself, I've seen you look better before. But something tells me, no, that's not the answer for the moment. The answer for the moment is minimally fine or great or wonderful. Now, in the Jewish tradition, we've got honesty, that's important, and we've got maintaining balance, harmony within the family or within the community. And in this case, the tradition is on my side. We can call this a white lie or whatever we want to call it, but it shows where two perfectly important and positive traits come up against each other, and what are you going to do about it? Somebody else may have chosen a different way of handling this. On the other hand, I've been married 53 years, and I don't think any of you have been, so I must know something about what it's all, don't know much, but something. Meanwhile, another example that was given, you're at a wedding, and at the wedding, everybody's dancing around and singing about how beautiful the bride is. And you look at the bride, and you say, well, yes, beauty is subjective, but I'm not seeing that this bride is all that beautiful. The honest thing to do, speak out and say, whoa, folks, come on, you're just kidding yourselves. She's not that beautiful. Or you sing along or mouth the words, because that will keep harmony going. And in fact, that's what the tradition would prefer. And then the final example, which is my own, you probably know how if someone shows you pictures of their babies that were just born, or infants, and the parent or the grandparent, the uncle or the cousin or the aunt or what have you, and they may say something like, aren't they cute? And you look at the babies and say, whoa, I don't think so. But what are you going to do? Obviously, you're going to say minimally, yeah, they look like you, or something perhaps ambiguous. So what I would do when I showed pictures of my grand-twins, I have grand-twins, they're 6.5, live in Chicago. What I would do is I would say to them, I know that everybody expects you to say my grandkids are cute, and maybe you're saying, oh, maybe they're not. I said, don't worry, they're the cutest kids in the world. You don't have to worry about saying anything that's not true. And all of that works as well. All right, now we turn from that to Jewish business ethics. For the most part, what I'm going to talk about are not unique aspects of Jewish business ethics, although I will start with them and I'll end with them. But the middle part is really about distinctive features of Jewish ethics. And most of this is what any person who's following I would say any person who's following appropriate business ethics, be they Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, this is what they would do. But in Judaism, even the traditions and the actions which are not unique, and by the way, I use the word unique in an absolutist way. This is the way I was taught. Things aren't more unique or less unique or uniquer or uniquest. Unique is unique. That's it. It's all by itself. That's the way we learn the word in the 5th grade. But so there are unique aspects, but most of what we're looking at are not unique to Judaism, but they are distinctive to Judaism. So business ethics in Judaism is made up of 3, if I will, components, and they are largely chronological. There is the biblical text. For Jews, the Old Testament, or we call it the Hebrew Bible, is the entire Bible. It contains exactly the same number of books as the Protestant Old Testament. Catholic Old Testaments, Greek Orthodox Old Testaments have more books. But we're talking here, I'm going to be talking about the books that are shared by all Jews and all Christians. And so that's the starting point. But just as it would be wrong for someone to assume that Christians today live a life exactly as in Jesus' time, so it's wrong to think that Judaism of today is the Bible and that's it. So the Bible obviously is a starting point and it's a foundation, but it needs interpretation and it needs application. And in fact, the history of the development of Jewish business ethics is a series of applications, reapplications, interpretations, reinterpretations, which is what I'm going to mainly talk about. Now, there is a tradition in Judaism that at the same time God gave Moses the Ten Commandments and the other laws that were written, he also gave to Moses a lot of oral communications that were laws. And these were not written down, hence they're called oral, until the 2nd century, 3rd century, and 4th century of the Common Era. Now, whether or not that tradition is correct, if you think about it, the biblical text in and of itself is not sufficient for us to make it a blueprint on how to live. So here's a classic example. In the Ten Commandments and in other laws in the Hebrew Bible, it says you shouldn't work, do not work on the Sabbath. Your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, your slaves, animals, do not work on the Sabbath. What does that mean? What does it mean to work? Well, you may think that something is work, and someone else says, no, that's not work. In a particular kind of culture, that would be fine. But as we'll see, it's not fine in Jewish tradition, because in Jewish tradition, the emphasis is on the community. And consequently, if you think that building a house is work, and I don't think that, it's just going to cause dissent. And so as time went on, the Jewish interpreters, and we just generally use the term rabbis, came up with a series of what counts as work that you should avoid. All right, these, I'll grant it, these are brilliant men living, let's say again, 15 to 1700 years ago. Well, guess what? There's a lot of technology which they could not have possibly foreseen. And yet, if you are an observant Jew, typically that's an Orthodox Jew, you'd want to know, can you use the internet on Sabbath? No. Can you have a light that automatically turns on and off? Can you have your TV that automatically turns off? Apparently, that's okay. So what happens is that as time goes on, there's new technologies, new cultures, and the basic premises of the Bible, as reflected through the oral law, become a dynamic part of Jewish life. So it's also very important to recognize that within Judaism, business ethics is central. It's not pushed over to the side, and I'll have some figures of that later on. If you have memorized the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, which I hope you haven't, but you might have, you would know that there are more than 25 places, I didn't memorize this, where you're told to make sure that your balances, weights, and measures are honest. This is, it sounds like a fairly small deal, but apparently it was a very big deal. Being honest in business interactions was considered to be an extremely big deal. And all of that continues on, and then what does that mean today? There are authorities within Judaism who give pronouncements and give guidance. We don't, by the way, in Judaism have any individual even coming close to the Pope or even a bishop. We're an independent-minded group of people in the sense that within our own community, we want diversity, and within our community at large, we want diversity, and we want to be able to think through things on our own, at the same time taking into account what tradition has bequeathed us. So I want to start with 4 examples which are specifically Jewish laws, and they strike me as somewhat problematic. Okay, so as I'm sure everyone in the room knows, we're on a sabbatical year right now. Whoa, every 7 years is a sabbatical year, as opposed to my sabbatical, which I'm going to have another one next year with any luck. But the sabbatical year, it's promulgated in the Hebrew Bible. It continues to this very day to be an important part of life in Israel. So in the Jewish calendar, we're in the year 5782. In the secular calendar, we're obviously in the year 2021, and the new year in Judaism began on September 7th. Okay, so there's a lot of rules and regulations associated with the sabbatical year. One of them is that in the seventh year, all debts all debts are forgiven. That you've lent somebody money, they don't have to pay it back. All right, that's part of a really utopian-sounding world, and that's the way it's described in the Bible. In several places in the Hebrew Bible, this is what it says. During the sabbatical year, all debts are forgiven. All right. As time went on and Judaism moved from an agrarian to a more cosmopolitan world, and money tended to be, people needed to lend money for building, for trade, for commerce, for all kinds of things, this didn't really work out well. Because why would I, as generous as I am, lend you $50,000 at the beginning of the sixth year when I know in 12 months I've lost it all? It's utopian, but not practical. So the practice developed that to keep the commerce going, it could be seen as advantageous to the wealthy because they're lending the money, but also to those who need the money because they need the money. The practice developed that in the sixth year, the end of the fifth, throughout the sixth year, I would lend you money, we'd sign a contract, then we'd take it to the court, and I would assign it to the court. So now it's the court's money, and because it's the court's money can continue to be collected, and the debt doesn't have to be just forgiven. Now, either that's a humane thing to do, or it's just a legal fiction. And you have to sort of think these through. Times change. Will our, not our ethical principles, but our ethical practices, will they also change? So there's another thing that goes on in the sabbatical year. Again, it's going on right now. Should you go to Israel now, which I don't think you can, they change the laws every day, who can come and go, but so do we. Anyway, this is the year, this is a Shemitah year. Whoa, Shemitah means release. And during this year in Israel, if you're Jewish and you own land, you cannot plant, harvest, or get any value, as it were, from vegetation, fruit, whatever you have. As humans rest, so the land must rest. It's a nice idea. It's got ecological benefits to it, but is it really practical? In antiquity, apparently, it was, but eventually the idea developed that, for example, in Israel today, if you're Jewish and you live in Israel and you have land, you sell it to a non-Jew. It's a real contract, but it's understood that they're standing in for you, and therefore, the land will be productive. Again, is that something which we feel like it's a valuable innovation, or is it a way of getting around some basic principles? And we'd want to know at least one more of these, and that is the holiday of Passover, which is a spring holiday. During the holiday of Passover, observant Jews do not eat a number of different products, including anything with yeast, and there's all kinds of rules and regulations. You should have a separate set of dishes, many sets of dishes for Passover, as for the regular year, pots and pans, a lot of other stuff. According to tradition, you take all of that out of your house and put it somewhere. Well, where are we going to go with our pots and pans and put them anywhere? So we have another, I'll put mine, we have another, what I would call, a legal fiction. And this is in Omaha. It's done through our synagogue. I sign a piece of paper, and I don't know that it's legally enforceable. It's certainly ethically enforceable. That I'm signing over all of my pots and pans of this sort and all my food to Andy Gustafson. Now, Andy now owns all that, but it's understood that at the end of Passover, he'll give it back to me, I hope. speaking of which, there's actually one more example, since I do like to eat. In Omaha, we have one kosher restaurant. It's called Bagel Bin. I don't know if any of you, it's 119th Pacific. And this has to do with what food they serve, how they serve it, when they serve it, who they serve it to, and a lot of other things. According to traditional Jewish ethics, if you own a kosher restaurant and you're Jewish and it's a Sabbath, which is from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday, you can't be open. But if you're a non-Jewish owner of a kosher restaurant, and yes, there are, the kosher restaurant in Omaha, the Bagel Bin, is owned by non-Jews, you can be open on the Sabbath. So indeed, I can list for you 3 restaurants, including 3 delis, including my favorite in New York, 3rd Avenue Deli, where every Friday night, the owners who are Jewish sell it to non-Jews, and then with the understanding they'll get it back on Saturday evening. These are not representative cases, but I thought they were interesting because it shows that if we're going to be effective, we have to be aware of changes, and then the question is, how aware of changes do we need to be? Okay, so now I want to circle back and look at a couple of different approaches to Jewish business ethics. They are complementary. They're different, but they're not like opposed to each other. So according to one authority, Jewish business ethics have 3 particular characteristics. The first one is that God is the ultimate source of value. Well, that's certainly understandable for Christians and Muslims, anybody in a monotheistic faith. God is the ultimate source of value. The second, and I've already mentioned this and I'll mention it again, is that the Jewish community is central. God's commands were first addressed to the community as what does God command us to do? So yes, there's a covenant, and we accept the covenant as individuals, but we activate it only as members of the community. And right here I'm talking about, broadly speaking, a Jewish community. So this particular authority pointed to 2 cases where he felt that a community-focused business ethic would have led a company or companies to make different choices than they did. And the first, these are dated some too, I'll just do one of them. Time Warner released an iced tea rap. Is iced tea still rapping? I don't think so. Does the name ring a bell at all? Sick transfer Gloria. Urging people to murder police. Okay, in support they said, well, we want to protect individual artists' freedom of expression. Protecting individual artists' freedom of expression is a perfectly worthwhile goal, but it certainly comes up against a sense of what is this going to mean in a community where people listen to these words. People might take these words seriously and act on them. And the communitarian viewpoint, the viewpoint which I think is indeed supported by Jewish business ethics, would say, we'll self-censor. We won't publish this song. It's not just that it's not beneficial, it's actually dangerous. Okay. And then in Judaism, another principle dealing with the community is that there are 3 levels of ethics and charity and responsibility. First to your family, second to your community, and third to people beyond your community. Now, that's a pretty widely held view in Judaism. It may or may not seem one that you would be comfortable with. It is one that I'm comfortable with in a certain respect, especially because the need, there's always a much greater need to help people than there is the means to do it. At the same time, as a corollary, as it were, to business ethics, the tradition says, don't give away all your money. Okay, wow, isn't philanthropy a good thing? Yes, but what happens if you give away all your money? Then you become someone the community has to take care of. So there's the community, and then there's the individual. And the last principle this individual came up with, and we're going to see it again, I think it's really significant, is that as people living in community, we can transform ourselves, and we can use ethics to transform ourselves. And the first way this is explained in the reading that I did speaks of two different kind of commands. There are certain commands which if you do them, and that's it. So if it says, hold this vegetable, which actually there is this, at a particular holiday, you hold this vegetable, you shake it the way you're told to, and it's finished. But there are other actions which the fulfillment of which comes only with a change of heart, or if you will, a spiritual transformation. And so it is in business ethics that Judaism has always been concerned not only with altering our actions, but also our motivation. This can be true at an individual level, it can be true at a communal level. And as it is, we tend to judge people based on their actions because we can see them. In Judaism, they say, well, God knows the motivation, and that's where the most importance occurs. Later on, we're going to see an example of the same idea, but it's going to be legalistic commands versus aspirational commands. And both of these share with them the idea of business ethics as a means of transforming. In another source, going back, when I say the rabbis in Judaism, speaking of the classical rabbis who lived between 200 and 600 AD CE. And they determined there were 613 commands in the Hebrew Bible. Trust me, I could count them and get 600, I could get 800. It's arbitrary, but it's cool. And I remember when I was young and I was in the youth group, and we'd have the Step Up to 613 club, and it's a focus. Whether it's exact or not, I would doubt. But according to that count, there's 613 commands, 100 of which deal with economic life. And that's found in the Bible, that's found in the authoritative texts of that were called the Talmud, the 2nd to the 6th century, and it's found to this very day. Again, business is a central part, not separate from the rest of communal life. And this person came up with, this particular individual came up with 6 guiding principles of Jewish business ethics. The first of which is business activity and profits. This is not profits, P-R-O-P-H-E-T-S. This is P-R-O-F-I-T-S. Just want to make sure you got that. Business activity and profits are legitimate. Broadly speaking, Judaism permits, approves, and encourages business activity, so long as it is conducted within the framework of religious and ethical norms. Judaism does not have a tradition of asceticism or a blanket mistrust of material goods and commercial life. Economic activity is perceived as an indispensable aspect of worldly existence. Profits, although not excessive profits, are considered legitimate. Okay, so it's business affirmative, if you will. The second point that this individual makes, similar to the one we saw before, is the divine origin and ordination of wealth. Because clearly, within a Jewish business ethical, or really any ethical system I could think of, you just can't do anything. What we're looking at is what are some of the determinative factors that are encouraged, and then what are some of the things which we are to avoid. Now, a lot of this sounds as if it goes beyond business ethics, and that in fact, I think I've made that point, and I'll make it again. Yes, there are specific ethical determinations made within the business world in the Jewish tradition, but they're not totally different from or separated from basic ethical concerns. One of which, it's interesting, if we think of God as the creator and God essentially as the owner, having created, God is the owner of the universe, and that is a pretty basic Jewish principle, then we as humans are caretakers and stewards. In effect, the Jewish farmer is a tenant farmer for God. And with that, that will certainly, if you take that seriously, that will certainly lead to certain activities and move people away from others. Within Judaism, there's a biblically stated twice command not to lend money to your brothers, and we would just use other Jews, at interest. Now, we're going to see that this was not held to the letter of the law, as it were. It was changed as time went on, but even when it was changed, we find that there were restrictions. At one time, and I'm not a business or economic historian, but at one time apparently interest rates of 86.23 was considered to be an appropriate interest rate. Wow, why couldn't I get that? But for Jews, yes, if they were lending money, as they often did, to kings or princes or commercial magnates or what have you, but within the community, it was always much, much less than that. It was much stricter. So there's, in essence, there's a free market, but it's a regulated free market. And perhaps that's a contradiction in terms. Because if it's free, it's free. But no, it's free and it's regulated. And the regulations are basically intended to protect you, the consumer, or you, the buyer. There is a command, or not a command, it's a piece of legislation that you're unable to, that you should not raise the price of vital commodities more than 1/6. That is 1/6, what's that, 12.5%, give or take? Okay, we'll say 12.5%. That's the most profit you can make on a vital community. These are things we need. And now, whether and how that would be enforced is a different issue, because much of this is theoretical, and the practical implications of it need to be worked out. Another basic principle of Jewish business ethics, again, part of Jewish ethics in general, is that human life is sacred. There's a sanctity of human life, so that not only were activities prohibited that unnecessarily endangered human life, but Jews were required, or are required, to take what I might call affirmative action to prevent harm from occurring to others. And there's a Hebrew term, and I won't throw in a lot of Hebrew terms, but it's an important one, pikuach nefesh, which means saving the soul. And what it means is that across the board, you can break any of the commands in order to save a life. So the best example today, you are a surgeon, and you're a synagogue, and you're praying. And if you're an Orthodox traditional Jew, you walk because you won't drive a car on the Sabbath, and you're there worshiping. It's very important. But because you're on call, you also have a pager. You get a call, emergency. We need you to operate on someone to save their life. Without a thought, the surgeon will hop into his car if he has it there, or get into a car, go to the hospital, and save a life. And that's what we call pikuach nefesh. Another example that I sort of like, although it's not the business world, I don't like it in the premise of it, I'm not real happy about, but your father is dying. That's not a good premise, but nonetheless. And the only thing that will keep him alive is a pill made with pork. All right, that may be impossible. I have no idea. And the question is, all right, if you tell your father that this pill has pork, he won't eat it because he's never eaten pork in his life. If you don't tell him and he takes the pill, his life will be saved. The tradition comes down, again, on the side of not something less than complete honesty in order to save a life. And so this is an important principle, and it works in business as well. On the economic sphere, there's a command, which is in the book of Deuteronomy, make a fence on your roof. We're talking about, think of flat roofs where people would gather, and you were commanded to build a fence. Clearly, that would be to stop people from falling off. In the tradition, this is understood much, much more broadly, because there have been any number of regulations within the Jewish business world that we would call today workplace or product safety. And a number of again, Jewish authorities today, there's no the authority, but among the people who are following the tradition and also taking into account changes that have occurred, there's consideration over the matter of pollution and what responsibility a corporation has to its community and to the world at large in regard to that. So along with that, there's another principle, protecting consumers from harm. So you may know the principle, caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. It assumes that, for the most part, you as a consumer have got to do all the research. You've got to take all the risks, and the seller puts it up there, and they sell it, and then it's your baby, whatever happens. That is not a Jewish principle, because the consumer, whether it's an individual like us or whether it's a small business, needs some protection from those who are selling products and services. And this goes beyond just the selling the product itself. According to some Jewish traditions, that was an implied warranty, lifetime warranty in whatever was sold. Other activities of a business nature have tended to be seen as forbidden under the principle of they create a stumbling block in the way of the blind. That's a direct quotation from Leviticus. So, yeah, really it would be more than tacky to put a block of wood or something in front of somebody who's blind. I mean, come on. But this is taken much more broadly than that to all kinds of actions. So, for example, some would say that selling guns is prohibited if you know that you're selling them to robbers or other violent individuals. And some rabbis, although not the majority, use this principle in order to either curtail or to essentially abolish smoking. Another principle that's important in business ethics within the Jewish world is avoiding fraud and misrepresentation. And there is an enormous body of material about what this constitutes. Now, something which I think most of you are completely unfamiliar with is that historically, Jews have been subject to persecution in Western Europe and in other places as well, on a religious level, on an economic level, on a political level, on a social level, where Jews could live, what Jews could eat. In the United States, up until the 1920s, Jews couldn't go to major universities. Oh, put it this way, only a very few Jews could go to major universities. And the idea that Jews are somehow or another unscrupulous in business is a standard canard or a standard part of anti-Semitic rhetoric. It has showed up in political campaigns not too long ago that we might be familiar with. But the point is that while I certainly cannot say every Jewish merchant and every Jewish businessman is honest, we've heard of a couple of examples of that will come right to mind, no. But what we're looking at is this is the tradition, this is what tradition has set as to be very, very important. In the world today, if you were to go to New York, parts of Brooklyn in particular, there would be stores specifically for Jews selling particularly Jewish food items or clothes items and what have you. But the principles here are generally abided by for Jews who aren't necessarily traditional. It sets a good goal and establishes a good environment. One more authority quickly, because it speaks of the distinction between a legalistic model and a model of aspiration. And we talked about this before with different terminology. In Jewish understanding of law, broadly understood, legalistic norms are, for example, if you have an ox and the ox has been known to gore somebody, you better make sure that ox is kept under very careful you place it very carefully, because if you've got a known ox gorer and he gores somebody, you're responsible because you should have known better. Okay, that's a specific issue, but it obviously has greater ramifications. And those are what this author calls a legalistic norm. The aspirational norms, which we spoke of before, that is, not just we do something, but we do something and it changes us. It changes our motivation. It changes our heart. It changes our lives. These are, according to some people, not necessary in the business world. The business world is cutthroat, man. We haven't got time to love anybody else unless it shows up in the bottom line. I mean, that's obviously not everybody, and that's a caricature of some sort. But if that is a view that some hold, it is not in keeping with Jewish ethics. These commands are, for example, the Ten Commandments are examples of that. Do not murder. Do not bear false witness. There's no specifics. What does exactly that mean in that command? They're generally in the positive and they're aspirational. And I like the terminology to distinguish between the legal statements, which are the way of God, and the aspiration, which are the way to God. Another aspect to look at is, which I will finish with, are three other examples that are more or less specific to Judaism, but in this case have had major real-world consequences for Jews. So, and again, I don't know how familiar you would be with this. Money lending. Throughout most of the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, Christians were forbidden to lend money to each other. The church forbade Christians to lend money to other Christians at an interest rate. And it was based on a command found twice in the Bible, that you shouldn't lend money at interest to your brother or God speaking to my people. This is what initially kept Jews from lending Jews money, but there were Jews now in the Middle Ages, and following the biblical text, they would be able to lend money to the vast majority of people who were Christian. They were Catholic. And lending money is a tricky thing. I mean, I don't know that anybody thinks of their bank, I should be careful about this, as their favorite institution. Maybe you do. But interest is the profit you get from lending money. Just as you cost you $3 to make something, you sell it for $4, those are profits. But there's something very particular, as it were, sometimes even, something about lending money, it can meet us in the gut. Jews did not become money lenders because they said, whoa, there's lots of things we can do. We want to lend money. No. They went into money lending because Jews were not allowed to own land if they were an agricultural community, or to join guilds if they were commercial. I mean, owning land, forbidden, and to join a guild, you had to make essentially a Christian affirmation. So Jews got into this money lending business and carried it out for several hundred years. The states, that is the governments, both protected it because, yes, the kings needed money constantly, princes needed money constantly, but they also exploited it because when things got tough, they would just expropriate everything from the Jews. And I know I would think this is sort of hard to believe, but because of issues related to money lending, Jews were expelled from England, they were expelled from France, expelled from almost every country. It was a tough way to make a living, and eventually the church changed its position and understood the command to mean not that you couldn't lend money at interest, but you couldn't lend money at excessive interest, which then became another issue. And there are other places, for example, Jews were often the middleman, if you will, person between the wealthy and the tenants. So again, Jews had very few choices about what they could do economically for most of the last 2,000 years. And so the noble wouldn't want to, get dirty and have to go collect the rents. And so Jews were available to do that. And then the people, the tenants, they didn't want to pay the rent. And the Jews were right there. And there was a lot of antagonism along those lines as well. Again, that's not something that is, I don't care how widespread it is, but in some, I would say that I consider, and again, I'm not unbiased, but I would consider the development and the application of, and the reapplication and the redevelopment of laws dealing with, and practices dealing with ethics within Judaism to be a good example of a functioning system which doesn't separate itself from the past, but also doesn't hide from the present. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for question and answer for Professor. So, any question? Responsive? Yeah.
I'm curious how much emphasis is placed on punishment or sanctions for somebody who probably gathers illicit profit or does something wrong.
Oh, that's an excellent question. Thank you. Like so many things, it was time and location dependent. So throughout most of the centuries, from the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, Middle Ages, into the early Reformation and Renaissance, Jews they lived as in autonomous communities. That is, they lived in a society that was Christian, and they were given the right to certain amounts of self-governance. And some of those would include, for the most part, economic development and economic affairs, and then they could also produce the appropriate punishment. But oftentimes, the punishment was determined by higher authorities and was out of the community's hands. Now, it's interesting to observe, though, to this very day, there are what I would call closed Jewish communities, especially in the Northeast, in New York, and we typically speak of them as ultra-Orthodox Jews. And they tend to be, they're in the middle of Brooklyn, for example. They're not, and there's some that are actually out in the suburbs, but they have to deal some with others, but basically they are self-contained. And if someone in that community is perceived to have violated an economic, ethical norm, the punishment is quick and the punishment is pretty complete. People will say, Joe's store, Joe down the street, everybody's found out now that, his weights are bad, whatever it is, and people just stop going there. And that, if in a small enough community, that would be very effective. Beyond that, it differs from place to place and time to time, simply because the degree to which Jews were able to mete out punishment depended a lot on which particular kind of government they were under. Is that okay? I mean, most questions that I get asked that are good questions like that don't have a simple answer, but because it's a complex situation. Thank you. Yes.
So you mentioned the part where, that seventh year where you're not supposed to work or use your fields and that. And you mentioned about selling the business for a year or the fields to like a non-Jew for a year, or the New York example of selling the deli on a Friday night. You were kind of going back and forth on it, I could tell. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is that right? Is that not right?
It's not, I don't know. It's not traditional.
It's almost like cheating the system.
Say that again?
It's almost like cheating the system.
Yes, exactly. Part of me says, yes, it is cheating the system. And the other part of me says, well, but that's the system that tradition has developed. That's a loophole for it. And I'm actually, I'm on both sides of that. Do you have would you give me like your feeling, if you don't mind?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the bagel bin. My friend's parents own that, the Breezacks, and they're Mormon, so I didn't know that about the kosher thing. And so I was curious. I was going through my head if a Jewish family owned that and they couldn't work on a certain. I would be disappointed because I'm not getting a bagel. But ultimately, I don't know. I'm more on the. I think it's smart to sell it. I mean, you're doing it before the Sabbath year. You have a contract in place, so you're going to get it back after that. I'm okay with it.
And the tradition is more or less okay with it. I will tell you, in the case of the delis in New York, and again, my favorite is Third Avenue Deli. So you remember when Third Avenue Deli used to be on Third Avenue, right? Oh my God, that was a long time ago. Now it's on 33rd. It's a long story. Real estate in New York is crazy, as you probably know, and even the most elegant, successful restaurant will sometimes have to close because they just keep raising the rents. But anyway, Third Avenue Deli, to my recollection, is one of those, and I have no problem with it, but I'm sure there are other people. And another problem you might have, just depending on your own personality, if you go to this deli and a couple of others like it, and you walk in, you do not expect them to say, well, hello, sir, how are you? They're going to say, hey, what's taking you so long? Don't you know the other people waiting? Give me your order fast. Come on, let's go. And that's part of the shtick. But I tend not to have, well, I wouldn't say I tend not to have strong feelings about things, but on matters like this, it's well, let me give you another example. I'm a conservative Jew, which is somewhat of a misnomer, because if I'm a conservative Jew, I should probably be the most traditional, like a conservative Protestant who's an evangelical. But no, in Judaism, conservative Jew means you're in the middle between the most traditional, or the Orthodox, and the least traditional, or the Reform. So I don't strictly observe the Sabbath, but I have plenty of relatives who do. And so I've always found it odd, although it's completely according to the rules as interpreted, that if there's a football game on Saturday afternoon, when you shouldn't be turning on and off switches, if you set the switch to go on at a certain time, that's okay. And I'm saying, no, I mean, I don't like to make a big deal about it, because frankly, nobody cares for my opinion on that, but I mean, it's okay. At the same time, I have relatives who take the light bulb out of the refrigerator because it goes on and off when you open the refrigerator door, and they're uncomfortable about that. And I said to myself, no, that doesn't seem like a matter I'd want to be all that concerned about. Yeah, you might. I did not. I've met the owners but I've never talked to them a lot.
It's a nice family-owned business, and I'm glad they rebuilt it after the fire.
Right. More questions?
I've got another one that maybe follows up on the first question. Is there any pattern of, or a responsibility in some cases to ostracize someone, to cut them off? Go too far.
Yes, and it's already, if we want to say it, it's already biblically sanctioned. So, for example, in Genesis, when the command is given to circumcise newborn males on the 8th day after their birth, and that if you don't do this, you'll be cut off from the community. I think that's a play on words, because they're cutting off and then cutting you off from the community. But today, the only place where that has any chance of actually having some validity is among these close-knit communities, where they can effectively, it could be because of bad business practices, but there are lots of other reasons why, they can effectively excommunicate someone. And it's very effective only if there's total community support, and also if being a member of the community is really important to the person who this is happening to. Since you didn't ask, this is just another example. And again, it's not something that relates specific to my life, but is part of Jewish tradition. In Jewish tradition, alas, only a man can give a divorce. And again, that is not exactly biblical, although the biblical text should be understood that way. And so what happens when a man is abusive to his wife but refuses to give her a divorce? So technically, there's nothing that can be done. On the other hand, exactly what you were mentioning, more than once it happens that if there's a man who's abusive and he won't give his wife a divorce, whatever business he's in, whatever practice he has, whatever profession he follows, nobody will have any dealings with him. And will actually, it means it's the power of community. And so in Omaha, there are about 6,500 Jews, and I don't know if those of you who live in Omaha know that Omaha Jewish Community Center, 132nd just off of Dodge, and it's got a home for the aged and a day school and a gym and all these activities and the synagogues, and the community is incredibly active, doing all kinds of things, both for members, its own members, but then for the community at large. And I am happy to say that according to the statistics I've seen, per capita, the Omaha Jewish community is one of the most generous around. Obviously, they don't think of my contributions. No, they're fine. Okay. Anything else?
This has been great.
Thank you.
Very much.